In this video we look at Soviet tank tactics based on the translation of a Soviet combat manual from 1944 that covers single tanks, tank platoons and companies. To quote directly from the manual, this combat manual must be studied by the entirety of the officer corps of the armored and mechanized forces of the Red Army. NCOs and enlisted men of the armored and mechanized forces of the Red Army must study the provisions of the manual regarding their duties. First, in terms of organization, the core element was the tank platoon. The tank platoon is the primary indivisible tactical element. It performs tasks both as part of a company and separately in combat support elements. Platoons of heavy and medium tanks consist of 2 or 3 tanks. Platoons of armored vehicles, armored personnel carriers, from 3 to 5 vehicles. So a medium tank platoon had usually 3 tanks and a heavy tank platoon 2 tanks. Of course, this is the authorized strength. Besides the platoon sizes, this is the same in German doctrine. For Germany, the sizes were as follows. Generally, the German medium tank platoon had an authorized strength of 5 tanks and the heavy tank platoon of 4 tanks for 1943 and 1944. In late war, there were also authorized platoon sizes with just 3 tanks. So since we got the organization down, we can look at the basic formations. The basic combat formation for the platoon was the line, as you can see here. The distance between the vehicles was 30 to 50 meters according to regulation. The platoon commander would be in the center. For a platoon with 5 vehicles, like armored personnel carriers, it would look like this. For a heavy tank platoon with 2 tanks, the platoon commander would be on the right. Here you can see how the medium tank platoon would deploy from a marching column into a line combat formation. Similarly, this is how a 5 vehicle platoon would change formations respectively. There are of course many more formations, particularly for the company, like the wedge and V. Note that the tank at the top with the rectangular flag is the company commander. The tanks that are linked with lines represent tank platoons. These are covered in more detail in the book, and if you're interested, be sure to check out the limited edition publication Tank Assault and enjoy your 15% discount launch sale on all our other books. Tank Assault is a faithful translation of the Soviet 1944 combat manual for the armored and mechanized troops, and it includes the tactics and formations of tanks in the Red Army, information on tank combat, and the original visualizations. The book comes with a foreword by prolific World War II tank expert Steven Zaloga. The limited bilingual edition is available until March 2024. To celebrate the launch, we have a 15% discount sale on all our books, including the one on the German tank companies, assault platoons, the Stuka dive bomber and more. Check it out in the description below. If you order during the launch window, these books will arrive before Christmas and thus the perfect way to treat yourself or a fellow history buff. Let us look at specific combat tactics or techniques as they were called in the manual. Note that these tactics are for the company level, so about 10 T-34 for a medium company. At first we must briefly describe the used symbols. Remember, a medium tank platoon had 3 tanks. The symbol for a tank platoon in combat formation is this. Meanwhile, the company commander tank looks like this. The manual outlines 4 techniques. A combat technique is used with the goal of taking an advantageous position relative to the enemy for an attack. Each combat technique must be executed covertly, swiftly and suddenly. In battle, armored elements use the following combat techniques: enveloping of one flank, double envelopment, flanking, frontal attack. You can imagine the last one, frontal attack, is a bit less complicated than the other 3. The manual gives no guidelines about when to use the first 3 techniques. The element commander must quickly and skillfully, depending on the situation, apply the appropriate combat technique for the attack. It only notes that if none of the 3 techniques can be applied, the frontal attack is to be used. To quote, "If it is impossible to perform any of the combat techniques with the enveloping of the enemy, the frontal attack combat technique is used." So let's cover the frontal attacks first. This is how it is illustrated in the combat manual. At the bottom you see the individual tanks. The tanks are in line formation. The platoon's commanders have a triangle flag. Now for the enemy, the arcs with the various lines outside are enemy defensive positions, whereas these small symbols in the middle represent 2 heavy machine guns and 1 light machine gun. It is important to note that this attack is conducted according to the manual in full speed and guns blazing. The attack is carried out at maximum combat speeds. Tanks are firing on the move. This is quite different from German doctrine, where firing on the move was the exception. For the other 3 attacks, it is noted that it requires that 1 platoon attacks from the front firing, while the other platoons move from the side or rear firing as well. So basically a firing and maneuver element. Again it notes, said groups attack at maximum speeds from the flanks or the rear, firing on the move. The first one is the enveloping of one flank. The 3 platoons are in line formation. On the hill there are several enemy positions, a gun and a machine gun. The left platoon attacks from the front, while the other 2 platoons envelope the hill from the right side. It seems that the positioning of the enemy gun towards the left might be the reason for the maneuver element to attack from the right, but this is just my interpretation. Now as you can see, all platoons move in this illustration. This is likely due to the fact that it depicts several stages of the battle. For instance, the left platoon might only move after the right platoons have enveloped the enemy. The instructions in my opinion are not clear enough if the left platoon is actually firing while stopped, which would provide far better accuracy. This was the issue with the other techniques as well, although later in the manual it specifically noted that firing on the move is used for suppressing enemy targets. The next one is the double envelopment. Here you can see that the enemy has no defensive positions and no guns, only 2 light machine guns. As such, I suspect that this attack was chosen due to the relatively low threat to the tanks, whereas in the previous example there were defensive positions and a gun that posed a bigger threat to the tanks. In this case, the center attacks from the front, while the left and right group encircle the enemy from left and right. The final technique is translated with flanking, although technically a flank is on the side of the enemy, not the rear, and in this case the enemy position is being attacked from the front and rear. In this case there are 2 defensive positions and 1 light machine gun, so it seems to be more protected than previous example but less than the first example. Additionally, the woods to the right seem to allow to approach the enemy from the back. Here 2 platoons attack from the front, while 1 uses terrain as a cover and attacks from behind the enemy. Let us look at the instructions on how to fire at targets. This includes how targets are designated and which type of weapon and ammo is to be used. Additionally, there are some further details on when to fire on the move or from a halt. First, designating targets. Because before you can shoot at something, you need to identify and locate it. The manual notes that local landmarks should be used. This is very similar to any other manual. For instance, a lone tree, a shack or bushes are noted, and then in relative terms where the enemy is located. A lone tree, 100 to the right, infantry in the bushes, 600. There are also instructions relative to the movement of the tank. When designating targets relative to the direction of movement of the tank, the heading angle to the target and the distance to it are mentioned. For example, plus 45 bearing, infantry in the bushes, 600 distance. In order to designate the targets more easily, the tank commander had a panoramic and a periscope sight. Despite verbally designating targets, one could also use other options as well. Tracer bullets and shells as well as radios are used for target designation for nearby tanks and elements operating together. This brings us directly to the choice of weapons and ammo. The choice of weapon and ammunition type is made depending on the nature of the target and the firing distance. The cannon can fire armor-piercing and subcaliber rounds against tanks, armored vehicles, self-propelled guns, embrasures of pillboxes, bunkers, and armored trains. Now, anti-armor subcaliber rounds usually are called APCR, armor-piercing composite rigid. These are rounds that have a core with a smaller caliber than the gun they fired from, but have a higher velocity, and the core is made of harder material than regular rounds. As such, they have a higher chance of penetration. The manual continues. High explosive shells against tanks, armored personnel carriers, anti-tank guns, artillery batteries, pillboxes, self-propelled guns, infantry, machine guns behind cover, and other targets. For some, high explosive shells against tanks might seem odd, but they are not. First off, every shot creates suppression. Second, although the main armor generally is not affected by small caliber high explosive shots, the vision slits, tracks and various parts can be damaged. Third, large caliber high explosive shells, particularly that from the 122mm of the IS-2, can damage even strong armor. They might not penetrate directly, but create cracks in the armor, stun or even kill crew members. Yet, let's continue with the final armor type. Shrapnel shells, against infantry as well as diving and attacking planes. The machine gun is used against personnel, mainly groups, in the open, crew of anti-tank guns, lightly armored cars, machine guns and mortars in the open. Although I must add, using shrapnel shells against aircraft seems rather optimistic, unless the spirit of Comrade Lenin personally would guide the shell. Just to be sure, I also asked 2 aviation historians about it, and they agree as well. About the optimism, not Lenin. As previously mentioned, there are more instructions on when to fire from the move and when not. The manual notes: when firing from a tank, the following methods of firing are used. Fire on the move, used for suppressing the personnel and gun emplacements. Fire from short halts, used against all targets. Stops are made with duration of 4 to 8 seconds to fire one shot from a cannon or several bursts from a machine gun. Places for short halts are chosen behind cover or a mask. Note there are several kinds of masks. Natural masks like forest terrain irregularities, and artificial masks, which were created by engineers. Fire from stops, used to fire from behind cover or a mask. A tank moving at combat speed, approaching a cover or a defilade, stops for 30 to 45 seconds to hit the target with 3 or 4 cannon shots. Stationary fire, the most effective type of tank fire, used mainly in defense and from ambushes. I find this rather interesting, particularly since I haven't seen something as elaborate in German manuals or reports. They are generally stated to use firing during movement as an exception, and the firing halt should be used. Remember to take the opportunity to benefit from our 15% launch sale on all books. This is the perfect time to pick up the limited bilingual edition and a host of other great World War II literature that is based on German or Soviet primary sources, like manuals and regulations. To summarize, in overall, some parts of these instructions are similar to German combat manuals. Particularly, the formation changes look extremely similar besides the different sizes and different symbols. In terms of tactics, I can't recall seeing similar graphics in official German tank manuals, but they were also structured differently and might have used pamphlets that I don't know yet. Yet I assume that a lot of the tactical training was in both cases done somewhere else. This would also explain the almost non-existent description for the different maneuvers that were shown as graphics. Additionally, this Soviet manual is far more extensive in scope and detail than the German manuals I have seen. I hope you learned something new. Thank you to Andrew for reviewing the script and all our supporters. Thank you for watching and see you next time.